out. Her name is Anagha Gopal. She's also on Instagram, so you can like connect because both of you are working on children's literature.
Like a great idea. So, and like difficult to come across people who work in. Now that's slowly changing, but when I was doing my research, I think it was very difficult to actually come across people who are doing their research based on children's literature. But yeah, now that's definitely changing. I see more and more people doing that. And yes, my currently I'm doing a I'm I'm working on a postdoctoral project on color in children's literature, in Victorian children's literature. So my project, the paper that I've submitted for the book in the lecture that I'm planning on talking about today is loosely based on that, but obviously the texts are not quite children's literature texts. They are the mainstream works, but yes, color in Victorian period is something which I am really passionate about at the moment and interested in.
That is amazing. There is this
Yeah, I think
beautiful.
that's great.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, no, yeah, I'm
Okay.
just yeah. You say it's
No,
fine.
so I
I'm just dropping the text in the group.
okay, so I have a paper which is currently in the second review stage. It was on this poem called Touch by Adania Shibli, and in that poem, you will see how Shibli is defining different chapters with different color names, and she was emphasizing the importance of color and stuff like that. So I find it quite interesting. And another paper which will be out probably in the month of April, and I discuss this idea or like fashion in Dalit literature. So that is how I am in a way connecting with this research. So I think we can start the session now. We have plenty of people who are in the meeting. So a very good evening, everyone. I am Ritam, and we have Shauli with us. And today we are hosting Dr. Athira Mohan. Shauli, would you like to introduce her?
Yeah, sure, that's an honor. So, yeah, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Victorian Vanguard. So, today we have with us Professor Dr. Athira Mohan. She holds a PhD in children's literature, which is centered around the politics of imperialism in the indigenous children's literature of India and Canada. From Pondicherry University, India. She is also the recipient of the Indo Canadian Shastri Fellowship for the year 2019 and has worked as a research fellow at the University of Saskatchewan, Canada during her stay. Also, during her stay at the USASK, she had worked closely with the experts in indigenous children's literature and had worked extensively on Canadian curriculum and the government policies towards reconciliation. Her interests include children's literature, post-colonialism, and the 19th century of the epoch. Currently, she is working as an early career researcher at the International Research Society for Children's Literature, and also she is preparing for her I think postdoctoral thesis and work. So yeah, we are very blessed to have you with us, and it's an honor for us to host you at our forum. Today, Dr. Mohan will be the topic of her lecture is Through the Folds of the Empire, a materialistic approach to the colonial fashion. So now the floor is yours, and yeah, welcome again.
Thank you so much, Shawnli and Ratam. So, before I officially begin on my thoughts, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak on Victorian vanguard, as well as I would also like to congratulate the organizers of this platform for facilitating a space where researchers can come together and share their ideas on research of long 19th century, which I think is very important as it continues to affect the moral systems and the institutions that we have today. So I would like to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
No.
Not really.
I'm sorry, but it seems to be stuck or something. But I'll just start on my paper so that I'm not wasting
No,
time.
you can do one thing. Send the PPT, just send the PPT to us, and then we can, I think, present it as well.
That seems like a good idea. I'll just do that.
Yeah.
It's lagging. I don't know why.
Just sent my presentation. Anyways, I'll just begin my paper so that I'm not wasting the precious time. So my paper is titled "Through the Folds of Empire: A Materialistic Approach to Colonialist Fashion." So the idea for this
Archana, please,
paper.
please, like, excuse me for a minute. It's all right. I mean, you take it easy. It's fine. People are already here. So I think since PPT is something that we prepare with so much effort and love, no, so I can understand like how it can be a bit sad if you made a PPT and you cannot share it. So we can wait for 2 minutes and then we can share the PPT. It's all right. You can start up, like, you can start after a minute. So
Sure. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's visible. It's visible. Sorry.
can you see my screen?
Yes, surely it's visible.
One second, guys. Yeah. So do let me know if it's visible.
Yes, visible. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I'll just
Yeah, do let me know when you want me to change the next, then change to the next slide.
thank you. So my paper is titled "Through the Folds of Empire: Materialistic Approach to Colonial Fashion." Can I have the next slide, please? Yes. So just to sort of consolidate my ideas into three sections, my paper is divided into these three areas where initially I would be talking about the process of reification. Uh, I'm sure most of you might be familiar with the idea of reification from Marxist theory. So, so my paper is intended to be a revisionist reading of selected works of the 19th century, through which I explore the hyper-capitalistic textile industry of the epoch and how it drained the erstwhile colonies of their resources and handymen and rendered several art forms obsolete. We know that empire was a looming presence in the 19th century novels, particularly where commodities from the colonies provided a majestic backdrop to the events, which I argue is a process of reification, where the lives and identities of a multitude were subjected to constant erasure through systematic appropriation and denial of subjecthood. And the second section of my paper is colors in empire building, which is in fact what my postdoctoral research is all about. I research about the role of color in the 19th century, how it sort of affected the children's literature and the printing process, the color printing process of chromolithography. But in this section here, I will be talking about how the industry of organic dyes again exerted a very negative influence on the color making craftsmen and the related industries in countries like India. And in the third section, I will be talking about the animal motifs in colonial fashion, which I'm sure we are all familiar with: the peacock, a bird feather, ostrich bone, you know, the fashion, how animal parts or animal feathers, bird feathers played a huge part in colonial fashion. And again, it should be noted that the adoption or appropriation of such imagery, including feathers or bones in textile, again, it was derived from, for instance, in India, it was derived from Mughal period, a very Kalgian ornament embellished with bird feathers used to be worn by the nobility, and similarly in other indigenous cultures as well. So that is a very brief skeleton of how my paper is going to be. Can I have the next slide? Yes. So these are a couple of texts which I found quite interesting in this aspect. And if you're interested, these are excellent sources for the topic. One is Dress Culture in Late Victorian Women's Fashion, Fiction, Literacy, Textiles, and Activism by Christine Bales Ghosh, which addresses the significance of fashion in molding the identities of the women protagonists of 19th century fiction, which underlines the importance of fabrics in self fashioning of the 19th century. And the second work, A Cultural History of Dress and Fashion in the Age of Empire, edited by Denise Amy Baxter, is talks about how Atlantic slave trade and the role played by slave trade in proliferation of fashion and production of Europe as a global market. Yes, those are the two books which I found useful. Well, there are more, but I feel the works that talk about fashion in 19th century are more centered towards the social construction of gender and performativity in connection with self-fashioning. But more research needs to be done on the materialist perspective of colonialism, which is again tied to the exploitative practices in fashion, which affects not just the subaltern lives of those in textile and color industries, but also rapidly depleted the bird and animal population of colonized countries. Can I have the next slide? Um, yes. Um, so although India produced more than muslin, cotton, and chintz, I strongly felt these were the triumvirates of colonial fashion, because these three fabrics they play a very important role in the 19th century fiction. Particularly, I would say muslins, because they make a very ubiquitous presence in Victorian novels, so much so that it became almost a cultural movement, which was spread through the popularity garnered by novels like The Lady in White. And again, muslins were largely imported from India and were much favored for the soft and flowy fabric, which could be fashioned into dresses of all shapes and patterns, as signified by this quote, which is taken from Ladies' Treasury, a fashion women's magazine in the 19th century. It says Madras muslin or Indian muslin was particularly fashionable as in its wavy flakes resemble sea foam, and the beautiful flower trimmings that are now disposed on ball dresses make such a muslin look as though some sea nymph had stolen to the shore. Again, The popularity of this material can be gauged from the fact that many Victorian novels had their graceful heroines clad in white, soft muslins. For example, in Thackeray's Becky Sharp, in Vanity Fair, um, she's described to be clad in your Indian muslin and your pink silk are said to become me very well. They are very good deal worn now, but you know we poor girls can't afford the self-righteous toilets. And again, in Middlemarch, we see the heroine coming to, I quote, towards him in her drapery of transparent, faintly tinted muslin. Her slim yet round figure never looked more graceful, unquote. Muslin, as you could see through these quotes, was the most befitting garment of choice for the pious and delicately feminine Victorian women, whose purity and innocence were the most important defining characteristics. However, the popularity of muslin among British consumers could also have sprung from its association with the Mughals, and owing to the fact that muslin was a prized possession during the trade of the earlier centuries, signified through the popularity of the garment among Greek and Egyptian circles, which actually brings us to a leitmotif of what my paper is trying to tell you. It's how fabrics flowed through the empire and who decided the direction of the flow and how it sort of modeled the empire. Um, I could also give you, this is familiar to most of us through the history classes that we have had at us in our school. Um, the Battle of Plassey, as we know, was a very key moment in Indian history, which extended the influence of the East India Company, and it led to a severe monopoly of uh, British made textiles, where the indigenous weavers and artisans of countries like India were pushed into extreme exploitation and suffering. And the mercantile policy of the East India Company not only levied exorbitant taxes on Indians, but also reduced the Indian subcontinent as a cheap source of raw materials for Great Britain and a market for their finished goods. Coming to the Indian cottons, they were incredibly popular in the Western markets, not only for their supreme handiwork or durability, but also for their sheer variety, as there were more than 15 varieties of Indian cottons. And these usually differed in parameters like colors and patterns and were sold at different price points. However, the most famous of the cottons were calicos and chins, which were favored for their intricate patterns and floral design. Can I have the next slide? Oh, this definitely didn't look like that. Something must have happened. The font is barely legible. I'm sorry for that. Um, so it reads, the beauty of old Indian painted calicos lies first of all in their color, which is the first thing to strike the eye. Again, this is from a book by Percival, which talks about the role played by Indian fabrics in defining the sartorial sensibility of British people. Again, coming to chins, it played a major role not just in the closet of Victorians, but also in their homes. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes. Again, he continues to say, an English house without a chins room was like Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, here we can see how the continuing role played by the fabric in defining the strongest fashion sensibility of not just 19th century, but exerting its influence in the coming centuries as well. Yes, so the durability of Indian cottons was a factor which rendered it endearing to the customers, as it is evidenced from how popular it was among particularly the English women. But the British cloth industry, especially the wool makers, were not exactly happy with this popularity, which led to the calico acts of the 18th century, much before the mechanized production of cotton cloth, which practically deprived indigenous Indian weavers of their livelihood. Um, I would say that calicos and chintzes influenced the aesthetic sense of British women to a considerable extent, while simultaneously remaining affordable. But the calico riots, which punctuated the atmosphere of the late 18th century, also made sure that British women were seen wearing calicos with chintzes, or no British woman was seen wearing calicos with chintzes, or if they were punished for the same. Can I have the next? Yes. So this is from a work called The Moral Economy of the 1719-20 Calico Riots, Harris. In this, he says associating calicos with low ranked women, and particularly young maidservants, brought the issue of female agency and corruption into the homes of many middling level families. Anti calico propagandists asserted that the manhood of the middle ranks and the nation as a whole was in decline due to feminizing effect of new luxuries and the increasing agency and independence of working women. So here we can see how fabrics, particularly fabrics taken from the colonized countries, how uh, strongly they affect the movement, be it the female agency or the capability of the lower classes to afford new clothes. So these were certain uh, strong social movements which were affected by the flow of the fabric. Another example of this could be the adjective chintzy, which is derived from the fabric chintz, which currently means it has a negative association as it means cheap and showy, but of a poor quality. So that's a whole meaning of the word chintzy, which actually came into existence through the mechanized inferior imitations of the chintz, which was mass produced in England. Yes. Um, while discussing how the nature of how value is assigned to material things from non Western spaces, Clifford suggests that all material entities get either assigned as cultural artifacts or as artistic productions. In other words, the context of their production in their home countries get erased while they are getting assimilated into the space of the West, which are acknowledged as artistic pieces that fit in aesthetic or as cultural artifacts displayed in a museum or a private collection. In either case, they are removed from the ethnic source of their production. For example, can I have the next slide? Yes, these were known as elaborate headdresses or turbans, obviously, were in fashion during the 19th century Britain, which was naturally inspired from the East. In the travels of Lady Wortley Montague, uh, she describes how she travels to the East and how she was inspired from the sartorial choices of women in the East, women and men in the East. So this is actually responsible for the popularity of turban, which many women adopted early in the 19th century. While clothes primarily serve the purpose of protection and secondarily serve the purpose of ornamentation, critics have also highlighted that uh, clothes play a huge role in marking a person's status and elevating or lowering their social class. So, when it comes to the European notions of fashion and sartorial choices, Indian clothes and articles of ornamentation ushered in an age where the common people were also exposed to foreign made goods and articles which they had never seen before, which allowed them to experiment with colors, designs, and fabrics and helped, I quote, to create a new middle class and forge bourgeoisie notions of fashion, unquote. For example, can I have the next slide, please? Certain emblems of indigenous royalty were adopted into the European closet, and one such garment, as you can see, is the paisley shawl. Um, yeah, it's called paisley shawl, which featured regularly in the fashion magazines of the 19th century, which was mostly made in Kashmir. And paisley shawls formed an important category of Kashmir shawls, which were coveted worldwide for their excellent quality and finish. Of course, Kashmir shawls make appearances in most popular Victorian magazines of the day, most popular Victorian novels of the day, adorning the closets of the leading ladies, among which we also have Becky Sharp of Vanity Fair. Um, there is this particular quote which I found interesting in the novel. I quote, "You better put on my Indian shawl. It will look pretty on your grey gown, scarlet and grey," unquote. Here, the scarlet Indian shawl contrasted against the grey British gown. It's a very chromatic, it's important chromatic detail, which goes together in an N symbol, which could be read as a metaphor for the British Empire in itself. When paisley shawls were mostly part of gifts offered to important people as well as by the royalty. The Mughal Empire of India, for example, was influenced by the practice of khilat, which established a hierarchical status or a relationship between the giver and the receiver. Sorry, 1 minute. Yes, yes. As I was talking about the practice of khilat, which was a gesture, which it's a ceremony which meant held a meaning in a particular culture. So khilat was yes. In fact, when the region of Kashmir was annexed to the Empire of Britain in 1846, the King Gulab Singh gifted the government 3 pairs of Kashmir shawls, among many other things, as a symbol of allegiance and support. This practice was, in fact, later incorporated by none other than Queen Victoria herself, who found a place for Kashmir shawls in her well chosen gifts to luminaries and important dignitaries who visited England. So here we see the practice of khilat, it's a gesture which held a particular meaning in a particular culture, getting embedded within another culture with similar set of meanings. In other words, this process of meaning making with a set of rituals and codes through repeated performance is what constituted the empire. And this is an example of how repeated performances borrow meanings from other culture. The pattern of Bhuta, which is this pattern on a paisley shawl, was quite an intricate and complex piece of handiwork, and it was a matter of pride to have a paisley shawl in one's closet. However, the Bhuta shawls gradually began to be known by the more familiar name that we call it today, paisley, after an industrial town in Scotland, where cheap versions or imitations of Kashmir shawls were made. In fact, a mention of these shawls is found in Girls on Paper, a periodical in the 19th century, which refers to, I quote, the dark imitation Indian Kashmirs or paisley shawlings, as they're sometimes called. Can I have the next slide? Uh, in this section, I'll be talking about colors and meaning making, or the sensory empire, or how colors influenced the process of empire building. Um, so, before the advent of synthetic colors, which was in 1856, through the discovery of a pigment called mauve, uh, cloth makers used to rely on organic dyes, which was not only a very difficult and lengthy process, but was also more expensive than the synthetic dyes. Um, when we talk about the Victorian period, most of us, at least I, used to imagine a very bleak and colorless historical period where people mostly wore. I don't know why I imagined it like that, but when you read Dickens or when you read the more popular novels, canonical novels of the 19th century, I think this is the impression that you get. But contrary to that, Victorian age was a very colorful period in terms of the cloth or fabrics or personal choices that most men and women of Victorian age had. One single thing, which was but partly influenced by the rich Orient ideas associated with the empire. So one such color was, which was extremely popular during the Victorian age, was peacock blue, which signified royalty and splendor. And this is no surprise, as peacock was always associated with magic and carried romantic and oriental ideas attached to it. So apart from using peacock feathers in their hats and ornaments, the color peacock blue was one of the most desirable colors for evening dresses, as mentioned in a popular fashion magazine of the day. Can I have the next? Yes. So this is a quote from a magazine called Ladies' Treasury, which describes Princess Helena's wedding gown. She wore a dolman of peacock blue velvet with deep chenille fringe, dress of peacock blue silk embroidered with peacock bronze. So she literally looked like a peacock. So again, the colors of the bride are found to be totally mimicking the appearance of a peacock, which was considered to be a bird associated with the exotic other, and ultimately the symbol of riches and vastness of the British Empire. At the same time, I found evidence of how peacock as a bird carried associations of mere ornamentation and vanity, which were certain which were frowned, considered to be vices, which were frowned during the age. For example, this is quote which I found again in a children's magazine of the day. I quote, "Little boys and girls, be not like the peacock, proud and vain on account of your beauty and your fine clothes. Humility and goodness are always to be preferred to beauty," unquote. So it's an example of how an oriental symbol of is used as a site of hybridity, where it denotes both the fascination and exotism of the oriental other, but it also signifies the danger of the unfamiliar. Another color which was considered to be extremely fashionable during the Victorian ages, can I have the next slide, please? Purple and indigo. But these were not just associated with royalty in Victorian England, but it dates back to the ancient Greece, where it was in fact called as Tyrian purple. The color purple also makes a strong presence in the British royalty. So, this is the gown which was worn by Queen Elizabeth II for her coronation, and it was described to be, I quote, "the most retiring of all rich colors, symbolical of dignity, state, and regal power," unquote. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is taken from a magazine called Girls on Paper, which was published in 1884, volume 5. So, this particular article discusses the fashion trends of the century or of the year. So this is the quote which I found interesting. "The dress made with accordion pleats and puffed overdress is the plainest of the three, may be made of nuns veiling, of the Nagpur or Kora silk, both are Indian cities, or of the new ecru muslin with white brocaded designs upon it. The first to present a large range of color from which to choose: white, tan, primrose, water green, beige, nankeen," which I feel has something to do with India again, maize, mustard. Indeed, any of the beautiful oriental colors in which the silks made in India are sold. Yes. So, this infatuation for oriental colors in the 19th century was fraught with exploitative practices in the colonies, which put the lives of native population at stake. As I mentioned before, William Perkin discovered the synthetic dye from aniline and led to the mass production of synthetic dyes. We used to rely on organic dyes, which was a very rare, expensive commodity, and it was sourced from the indigo plantations of colonial India. I'm talking about the color indigo and purple, specifically Bengal. Colonial force drove many Indian farmers into cultivating indigo, which was then brought at extremely unfair prices, which brought them to abject conditions of poverty. In fact, the famines of the Indian subcontinent under British rule could be connected to the indigo dye, which eventually prompted the farmers to rise in rebellion as the Nil Bidroho Revolution, also known as the Indigo Revolution. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. So, this section is called "The Thing with Feathers, Animal Motifs in Colonial Fashion." Um, this particular painting, which forms the backdrop of this slide, is called Vivian. It's a very popular 19th century painting. Before I come to the painting, I'll just read the introduction. So, in the 19th century, fashion, including colors and motifs, were largely inspired from the nature, be it the motifs of flowers or plants or silk dresses, simulations of animals, insect patterns on the fabrics. There was a definite spirit of vitality and kinetism in the air. However, a significant impetus behind fascination for natural impressions lies in the fact that the sartorial aspirations of British citizens of the 19th century were deeply connected to the empire. It's also important to note that there were very strong difference in the way 19th century men and women dressed themselves. For instance, for the men who traveled to the empire, to places like India, clothes stood as a marker of their identity. You can, when you look up the pictures of 19th century India, you can see Britishers actually very impractical clothes which doesn't suit the Indian weather. For instance, they would be dressed in waistcoats and multiple layers of clothing, quite impractical for the Indian topography and weather. They, I feel, are trying to have a very close allegiance to their motherland, reflecting strong British sentiments in their garments. But for women who either stayed back in England or they were exposed to the Orient only in brief sojourns, their aspirations for the unknown and the exotic part of the world often reflected in their garments. For example, Indian chintzes, which were much popular in England, had motifs such as tree of life and peacocks and other animals usually posed in a kinetic state. So this is the painting called Vivian by Frederick Sanders. I'm coming back to it. So this is a very popular Victorian painting, and it portrays a character called Vivian. She's also referred to as Lady of the Lake. You can see a woman's torso here, and the backdrop is entirely covered with peacock feathers. Vivian is a fictional enchantress. She put Merlin into a state of deep sleep after tricking him into revealing the deepest secrets of his magic. Naturally, the picture or the character carries an aura of mystery and enigma around her, which the artist renders powerfully through the colorful plumage, which provides the enigmatic background. And this is an example of how the empire reveled in the spoils from the Orient, which at once stood for the enigma of the other, as well as the richness which the empire was able to afford. Coming to the animal motifs in Victorian fashion, um, I'm not just talking about exotic animals like tigers or leopards or elephants, but I'm also talking about animals like roosters or commonplace animals like hens and horses and pigs. They also found a place in the clothes of 19th century. And so this is distinct question that we need to ask. Why were animal motifs so popular during that time? There are multiple reasons for this, as the 19th century was also the epoch which quite famously stated the bestial origin of man, which was postulated through Darwin's The Descent of Man. In fact, there is this quote which I found interesting. This is by Fabienne Moin, who looks at the role of women's cloth choices in bringing nature to the public sphere. I quote, "The Victorian public chose to give animals a heart and mind, an image so appealing that it not only quelled the fears of man's bestial past, but also served as an emblem of the heart and an example to the human race. The Victorians were ready to welcome animals into their social sphere, and women were the vanguard of this process." But another aspect of this increasing trend of animalism in fashion was that the display of animal themes and patterns did not extend to an emotional connection with the varied life forms, but rather it exhibited a very strong split or a sort of a bifurcation of the realms of the public and the private. In other words, there was a disengagement with the natural world, fostered by the maxims of capitalism and utilitarianism. J.S. Mill, Bentham, and Ricardo have famously argued for, I quote, maximization of self interests as the virtue and idea of rationalism, unquote. So, quite similar to how the trophies of leopard skin or elephant tusk were displayed in a Victorian drawing room, women like to incorporate animal motifs as part of their closet, thus establishing a strong link between empire and their subtle process. Insects were also commonly used in Victorian jewelry, specifically scarab beetles, butterflies, and bees. Naturally, insect wings have this quality of iridescence, which had an aesthetic appeal during those times. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So this is from this is a um, it's an ornament called a perrier, which I feel is quite similar to a necklace, which belonged to Lady Granville, which is crafted in Egyptian style, which is made from Brazilian beetles. Beetles are a kind of insect quite similar to a beetle. And this was presented to her by the Portuguese ambassador, which is a tale in itself of how empires built on material exploitation of the colonies. But it was not just a matter of aesthetic appeal, but also the symbolic relevance of these artifacts that attracted the wearers. As, for example, the scarab beetles were an integral part of Egyptian culture or mythology, as they were associated with rebirth and transformation. And it is also common knowledge that Victorians were obsessed with Egyptianism or Egyptian culture, so much so that they held parties where excavated mummies were opened to a crowd of curious onlookers, and which was referred to as Egyptomania. So, this obsession resulted in intricately carved ornaments made of scarab beetles and designed to resemble serpent heads, which is again a popular motif of Egyptian jewelry. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes. Catered to a taste for the exotic, which represented an escape from the drabness and conformity of the modern industrial society. The acquisition and transportation of Egyptian monuments, recognized as symbols of cosmic power, was a decisive bid to legitimize the rule of the modern empires. Again, the process of taxidermy has cultural roots in Egyptian culture. Animals, because animals were the earliest instance of taxidermy is in fact found in Egyptian pyramids, where animals were often embalmed in the pyramids and burial sites of pharaohs and other important people, either due to an emotional attachment or certain animals were representative of certain deities worshipped by the Egyptians. And Victorians were particularly interested in this craft of taxidermy, and it constituted an important part of the Great Exhibition of 1851. And in fact, it could be said that the event was the first on such a grand scale, which brought together many exhibits of taxidermy under one roof. It was described to be, I quote, an interesting and respectable craft, unquote, which rendered the process familiar to the common people who were drawn to incorporating elements of taxidermy to enhance their style. Can I have the next slide? An example of how taxidermy was incorporated by the Victorians in their fashion choices is evidenced through the stuffed bird hats which decorated the closets of Victorian women. So the usage of feathers in decorating hats, I think it's quite common even in the 20th century or even now. But the usage of whole birds or even small animals as a fashionable headgear was a macabre practice, which was very unique to the Victorian age. And the taxidermy birds were often propped up on springs, which gave a kinetic and realistic appearance to the beings, which resulted in a carnage of several species of birds, particularly exotic species of birds, such as birds of paradise and ostriches. And such items of clothing were often designed in such a way to render the wearer the resemblance of the birds themselves, which were usually worn for balls and dress parties. For example, can I have the next slide? We have the description of two such dresses, which are modeled on canaries and parrot, effectively. Dress of yellow plush or satin with canaries on the shoulder, the bird's head forming the cap. Sometimes the yellow satin is embroidered in pearls and canaries are scattered all over the dress. A yellow gown with cuirass bodice and cap of green feathers like a parrot's head, two long feathers forming the tail on the skirt. The rest of the dress green satin with wings at the side formed of feathers. Yeah. Again, another bird which was most commonly used by the Victorians is peacock itself. Coming back to that, peacock is a bird which often stood as a metaphor for the Orient, and apart from peacock feathers used in ornaments and dresses and hats, jewelry was also modeled on peacock colors and patterns. For example, the pre-Raphaelites, they had a very strong obsession for peacock colors. Um, I quote, most of all aesthetics like the colors to look strange, antique, vaguely exotic as peacock blue. They could be identified by sunflowers and peacock feathers, unquote. Two very common motifs which were found in pre-Raphaelite poetry are sunflowers and peacock feathers. And peacock feathers were also used to make long trails of gowns, which were fashionable among the elite. Again, while the symbol of peacock has a certain kind of resonance to Oriental themes, it is also important to recollect the peacock feathers were usually used as ornaments in India itself, especially by the nobles, and known as kalgi, peacock feathers were incorporated into ornaments which were characteristically tied around the turban. Inspired by the kalgi, head ornaments called aigrettes adorned the closets of the elite in Victorian age. In the 1890s, aigrettes became the most popular of all forms of head ornament. The desire for the exotic other, as exemplified by an affinity to the peacock colors, could be best illustrated by Lady Curzon's famous peacock gown. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, so this is Lady Curzon's famous peacock gown, which was worn on the occasion of the coronation of King Edward VII in 1902. So this is made of pure gold threads, peacock feathers, and beetle wings. So, the dress is a classic example of how materialism was central to the British Empire, as she wore the famous dress to a ball which was conducted in Diwan-e-Khas Palace, which was home to the peacock throne during the Mughal reign. Other examples of piecemeal fashion found in Victorian age include Charlotte Bronte's much celebrated novel called Jane Eyre, where she presents a picture of, I quote, the two younger of the trio had grey beaver hats, then in fashion, shaded with ostrich plumes, unquote. Whereas in The Green Dwarf, which is her less discussed juvenilia, she portrays Lady Emily with, I quote, ostrich feathers she had laid aside, fastened with a gold cord, unquote. So this is a reflection of the popularity of ostrich feathers, not only in fashion but also in the public sphere. Display of such exotic material paraphernalia signals the pinnacle of the British Empire. For example, in 1852, the funeral of the Duke of Wellington was conducted with much solemn pride and pomp, where the spectacle of the hearse being pulled by 12 black horses stood out. Each horse was decorated by black ostrich feathers. In fact, a magazine called Animal World in 1895 reports the case of many ostrich farms in Africa where the birds were exclusively raised to be slaughtered for their feathers, which had a huge demand in Europe. The killing of animals were not only for the feathers or fur, but for perfumes in case of ambergris and civets, elephant tusks in case of ivory, in addition to an increasing demand for pearls and silk. I quote, a middle or upper class Victorian woman might wear a dress made of fine alpaca wool, drape herself in a sealskin jacket, strap herself into a whale bone closet, brush her hair with a tortoise shell comb, and sport the feathers or sometimes entire bodies of wild birds in her hat or earrings. Unquote. So, a major part of this exploitation was obviously linked to the people of British colonies, as General Charles Gordon had famously remarked that, I quote, ivory trade is only slave trade under another name, unquote. Elephant hunting has dramatically reached its zenith in parts of India and Africa by 1860s, reflected in the literary narratives of the day, testified by the imperialist aspirations of many characters, such as Hernet Pocket in Great Expectations, who says, I quote, I think I will trade also to Ceylon for elephant's tusks, unquote. Patterns of consumption which ruled British taste during the 19th century, the heyday of the empire, cannot be merely conceptualized in terms of mere fashion or individual taste. On the other hand, a tendency to expose the vastness of their empire was what governed the sartorial choice of both elite and the common alike, which is revealed through these lines taken from a story published in Girls on Paper. Can I have the next slide? Whether in Hindu slippers, Chinese shoes, or Indian moccasins, Brazilian feather flowers and hummingbirds exhibited their glories in the park, whilst a shark's jaw and a stuffed cayman found their way into the doctor's little study. Unquote. So this is taken from a story about a doctor who practices, a British doctor who practices in India. So his house, the description of his house, his single drawing room looks, or his single space looks like an excerpt taken from a museum. So because he has, it's a microcosm of empire in itself. He has Hindu slippers, Chinese shoes, Indian moccasins, Brazilian feather flowers, hummingbirds, a shark's jaw, and a stuffed cayman. So this is just an example of how fashion in the long 19th century was an abstraction of the empire in itself, and how it helped to create a middle class in colonial countries like England. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for such an amazing lecture, to be very honest, because for the first time, give me a second, I'm having some technical issues with my device. All right, yeah. So Thank you for such an amazing lecture. I really enjoyed it, and you have discussed almost all the areas that was there, and I'm sure plenty of people will have plenty of questions regarding this. Shall you would like to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting lecture. I really loved how you kind of delineated the entire history of fabric, and not only fabric, but also its colonial history and how it has been reiterated and recalibrated in other states as well. One of the very interesting thing that I loved about your research that you did not stop while talking about muslin, but also you talk about calicos. And calicos is something that I have not seen a lot of people talk about in their research. So that was a very nice point. Um, Another very interesting thing that I also have a question that you are a person who had worked on your on fabrics. You have worked on the colonial history of animal patterns and motifs from paisley to chintz, and now at this era, at this approaching epoch, we see still the same thing taking place in this third place. We see the madras checks being worn by, yeah, same with madras checks being worn in the west, and they calling it their own. Then we see chins coming big, being reinvented. The I think in the west they are trying for a long time to reinvent the muslin. It's been a long time. Then we see the same colonial stuff, the objects from the third world countries, like the chappals, the Kolhapuri chappals being called the Prada chappals. Then the dupatta being called the Scandinavian scarf. So, what is your, as a historian who has been working on fabrics, what is your take on this? That is something that I wanted to know. So, after answering the question, I think the audience will also have questions. So, yeah, it was a very, very engaging lecture, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much. Yes, as you have rightly mentioned, dupattas being called Scandinavian scarf, not just fabrics. I think this appropriation, sort of cultural appropriation, is in all layers. For example, in food, how haldi doodh is getting called as turmeric latte.
Latte.
What was it? It's called a Buddha bowl. I mean, it's just a salad, but yeah, I mean, vegan form of burrito bowl getting called Buddha bowl, and yeah, there's appropriation happening, cultural appropriation happening in all spheres, and I also feel it has to do with how certain colors are called trashy when particular section wears it. When another section wears it, it's called chic and happening and all that. And recently, I came across a post by an author which talked about the clean girl look, with the slicked hair and oiled hair and all that, and which used to be, but when she was an NRI kid growing up in the United States of America. Well, she was growing up in she was sharing her traumatic experiences of going to an American school with well-oiled hair and how she was the butt of all jokes, and now it is getting revamped as the clean girl look and with the slick hair and all that. But that just, I think it just takes us back to the whole Foucault Foucault's notion of who holds the power and who gets to name things and who gets to. But I'm quite glad for social media because everybody has a platform to speak up now, and even though somebody comes up with a product, Kolhapuri Chappals gets, renamed as Prada's own invention, or somebody gets to call dupattas as Scandinavian scarves. I think we also have a voice now, which was not the case probably 20 years before. So, yes. And I also remember something which happened 2 years back. I visited Westminster Abbey in England, and I was queuing up to enter the church. So there was a wedding which was taking place in the church, and because of that, the queue was pretty long, and the wedding of some royal person happening inside the church. So there were many royal kings and, I don't know, maybe members of the royal family who were coming to attend the wedding, and people were thronging on the gate to have a look at them. And I spotted a couple of them wearing dresses made of peacock feathers. I'm talking about 2 years back. I'm not talking about the 19th century. So that is being continued. And I think it's just yes. And I was queuing up to see the Kohinoor inside the Westminster Abbey, which is again quite ironic. So yes, I mean it's but I do feel times are changing because we have been granted with a pedestal, an opportunity to speak where there is no option for them because they cannot shun our voices or they cannot. We have a voice now to speak back.
I think that sums it up very beautifully because you also kind of talked about that how this cultural appropriation is also a form of epistemic violence. And at least now that we have the social media and the entire idea of uh, we kind of this entire this entire racism, the Bindi movement, I think was the Bindi movement that happened in England, that whenever they used to spot a woman wearing a bindi, they used to go and like hit her. And this the Bindi was the Bindi movement was happening for a very long time. And also this constant hatred and racial slurs for the brown skin, that is now taking appropriation, that they are getting tanning sprays and tanning their skins. So the power of, yeah, social media is something that makes us think, gives us a voice, and that is very beautifully put. Yeah, thank you. You give a very nice answer. I think Sonakshi has a question. Sonakshi, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Sure, thank you so much. Good evening, all. My question is that, ma'am, how far do you agree with Gayatri Chakraborty's PVAX? Can the subaltern speak? Like, I'm saying it with reference to indentured laborers who were transported to various other countries. And, ma'am, do you think color and clothing, they play a very important role in someone's formation of identity or psyche? Yes, that's it, ma'am.
I strongly feel that because, as I just mentioned before, I feel colors and how certain colors are dubbed to be, for example, in the 19th century itself, we can see writers like Dickens, Charles Dickens, for instance, dubbing red or scarlet as a color for primitives, primitive folk, or for the infants. While if you look at the pictures from the 19th century, you can see most British men, for instance, even the scarlet was a major color in the army uniform itself. Certain high profile army men were clothed in red. And red was also a very fashionable color with Victorian women. But when red is getting dubbed as a color for infants and the primitive, I think it is in fact, there is a wonderful book called Chromophobia by I forgot the author's name. I think it's David something. Yeah, it's called Chromophobia. So that's such an interesting read because it tells you the historic evolution of how certain colors, especially certain dark colors, got branded as not fashionable, not just not fashionable, but also, for instance, if you look at the history of the color yellow, yellow was always a frowned upon color in the West. And that is why during the time of the Holocaust, Jews were made to wear a yellow patch, which was called the David Star, which was yellow in color, which was used to identify them from the rest of the crowd and which was used to sort them into concentration camps. Similarly, Oscar Wilde, I think he's written this book called Yellow Book or Yellow Pamphlet. I don't exactly remember the name, which explains the traumatic encounters that he had to go through for his different sexual orientation. So that I feel has, to come back to your question, I feel colors has a very major role to play in somebody's formation of someone's psyche and how their identity is being formed. Even in India, coming from the cultural sphere where I'm from, we often make seemingly innocent comments on people's complexion and how certain colors suit certain complexions and how certain colors don't. suit certain, which again comes from the colonial hangover that we have. It's a case of internal colonialism. Um, yeah, that's an example of how I feel colors play a role in forming our psyche.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a nice explanation. Many of my doubts got cleared, and I will definitely check out the book Chromophobia. Thank you so much.
And coming from this idea of how colors have been, real meaning of colors have been reiterated and changed, the relationship between the signifier and signified, how it changed throughout the course of time. Another thing that makes me, I think, question this entire idea of color is how colors have been gendered. I think that the color blue being assigned to the male and the pink being assigned to the female is also very similar to which skin tones is associated with which color. For this suitable for Indian skin tone lipstick brands. So this entire branding is also it's very racist in that sense.
Yes, so this is very interesting. You just reminded me of something very interesting which I came across a book. I don't remember the name of the book, but I'll definitely share it with you once the presentation is done. So, in that book, I read that uh, this whole gender segregation of colors, blue for boys and pink for girls, was again a 19th century thing. Before that, it used to be blue for girls and pink for boys, which is quite. I think we can.
It was in France. I think the France nobility, the men used to wear pink and the females used to wear blue.
Blue, yes, yes. Again, how that happened in 19th century, I think that's a conversation that we need to probably go back in. I don't remember that, but I found it very interesting how arbitrary as you mentioned, the relationship between signified and signified is.
So I'm loving how where the conversation is going. So I don't know if you have yeah, raise your. I think Bikram has a question. You can unmute yourself and ask.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, hi Athira. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. So I just one, not just question but clarification. So you use the concept of reification in
Yes.
your so I just thinking whether you use it from like the Marxist point of view, like just fetish character of the things, or is it from like Frankfurt School and their perspective of like reification? Like I don't know particularly his idea of reification and identity and other things. So it's also like the reified object and his concept of de-reification. So I mean, if you are using it from a post-colonial perspective, I mean, you are particularly so as a decolonizing the empire. So I just thinking about whether you use it from the Adorno's perspective or just a like Marxist point of view. And just another note is the folds of the empire. So what does the folds mean here? So, is it coming from the dress, colors, and other things, or just another things? That's it. Yeah, thank.
Yeah, thank you, Bikram, for your question. I must confess that I am not very familiar with Adorno's concept of reification. That's something which I'm not familiar with. I have used the concept strictly from a Marxist point of view. And to answer your second question, can you repeat that once more? I didn't get that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the folds of the empire. So the fold. What does fold mean? Is it? I mean, just my curiosity. Just the question is from coming from Deleuze's book, The Folds. So I think the Leibniz and the fold. It's on monad and
No,
folds.
again, I have not, I have not taken it from
Yeah,
Deleuze.
yeah, and no problem. It's just from my curiosity. But what is your I mean take on the folds that you are talking about? Because just for like it's like empire. I mean the British Empire and the India. So their I think intersection, their connection can be it's maybe like say folding and unfolding similar way and how things are coming there and going there and other things are extending. So just for that perspective. So, but just my question is, you are using and the folds of the empire. Is it just the title or any other, I mean, particular theoretical concept in your paper or other thing there?
It's just the title, and I think the conception is pretty much straightforward. But you have, I quite like how you interpreted it, but mine was just quite straightforward. Empire imagined like a fabric, and the folds of the fabric, folds of the empire, just a wordplay. That's what that was my intention. But yeah, I mean, I like your interpretation is quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Your presentation is also very nice. That's I enjoyed.
Thank you.
So I think it's like pretty much it. We have received a lot of questions, and adding to that color point, I think I don't know, I never verified it, but the when we talk about Christmas, we usually associate with Santa Claus and how the Santa Claus is associated with red, but it was not the same case before. I think it was after Coca-Cola's campaign they portrayed it as red, and after that everyone was started using red as a symbol. So uh, it is quite interesting. I really enjoyed the lecture, and I hope we do not have any other questions. If you have any question, then you can definitely write on the chat box, or you can just ask it.
I have a question. Uh, do we decolonize our mind? I think we are victim of colonization somehow, and both cultures are intermixing with each other and creating a new culture hybridity uh, that takes the third space. Can you please throw some light on it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel this is quite a personal opinion, quite subjective. I'm not a post-colonial theorist per se, but I feel we've reached a point where it is quite difficult for us to completely diverse us from what we call the British ideals, including the language. It's almost impossible for us to diverse ourselves from what the empire has given us, including our value systems, language, literature, everything. But I think it's also beneficial to know the history of what comes from where, which helps us to understand the fact that culture is not it's not a monolith. I think especially in today's India, we tend to understand culture as a monolith. It's a very strong fixture, but culture has always been in flux. People come, people go, culture changes. It's always in a movement, and the more we read about it, the more we study it, I feel um, if you ask me, I don't think the process of decolonization has to do with a complete rupture from our history, or for that matter, our what the colonial period has given us. It sort of means to de-associate ourselves from feelings like shame and guilt that hold we tend to have for our culture, for our language, for our indigenous sort of pedagogic systems or stories. Or yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
I think if we carry on, like we think since it's a very interesting topic and fashion is something everyone is interested in, so the conversation can go on for hours. Achira, would you like to write your email ID in the chat box? So if the audience have any questions, they can reach out to you, or like if they want to know about your research. Yeah, so Dr. Mohan's ID is written down here at the chat box. So if you want to reach out to her, if you have any queries and if you want to know more about her research, you can reach out to her. And yeah, I think, oh, thank you for writing down the name of the books as well. I think I will also take it down. It was very nice. Let me just click a photo. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll just send another book. This was the book which I talked
Yeah.
about, Chromophobia by David Batchelor. Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Thank
yeah.
you
The
so
other one
much.
is important, but that's exclusively about American literature. So
Thank you so much. I think that is it. We had a very fun, interactive, and such an intriguing lecture today. It was very informative and it was very interesting. The audience is also equally very interested, and it was very, I mean, one of the most thought-provoking lectures as well. So thank you, Dr. Mohan, for joining us today. It was a honor and also a pleasure listening to you. And I think with this, we will take your leave today and we will meet you at the next session of Victorian Sundays, hopefully.
thank you so much. I'm very honored and delighted to have presented a lecture on Victorian Wonkard, and I hope I can associate with this platform in the future as well. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Looking forward to working with you, collaborating with you, and also towards reading your paper.
Sure.
Thank you. So, with this, we will,
I'm
yeah,
I'm presently writing a paper on color and Victorian playtimes. If I get it published, I hope I will in 1 month or so. I'll definitely let.
lovely. Lovely, lovely. Please do. We would love to read. We would love to read.
Sure.
That is a beautiful topic, and yeah, looking forward to hearing from you more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
With
so
this, we
much.
will take your leave. Have a wonderful Sunday and wonderful evening as well. Bye, everyone.
Bye.